Welcome to Viking.TV. My name is Sharon Hudgins, and I'm here today to talk with you about reindeer, one of my favorite subjects. And I'm going to tell you the real reason that so many people believe that reindeer can fly. But first, I want to tell you just a little bit about myself and how I came to be here on Viking.TV today. My academic background is in Russian studies, but I also have a master's degree in film production. And for 20 years, I worked as a university professor in the United States, Europe, and Asia, including Siberia. And during that time, I also developed a kind of parallel career as an author and journalist, writing books and articles about people and places and their foods all around the world. Well, in 2006, I began working for National Geographic as a lecturer on their educational tours. And after that, I worked for Smithsonian and other educational organizations. And in 2017, Viking Ocean Cruises asked me to be a guest speaker on one of their cruises. Since then, I've worked on 12 Viking cruises, loved every minute of it. I've worked in the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Baltic Sea, and I'm looking forward to the Mediterranean soon. And on those cruises, I give lectures about the history, the culture, and the cuisines of the people and places that we visit on the cruises. So, how come I ended up talking about reindeer? Well, that's part of the story I'm going to tell you today. So, welcome to Reindeer, Riders of the Night Sky, as I call them. And I first became interested in reindeer way back in 1969 in Scotland and again in Norway the next decade, really just quite by accident. In 1969, my college roommate and I were traveling around England and Scotland by train, and we came up to the Scottish Highlands because she wanted to go to the to Aviemore in the Cairngorm Mountains because that's a big ski center and she loves skiing. So we got to Aviemore, we got off the train, somehow we got a ride out to the ski center, went up on the ski slope and to the top of the ski slope, and it was sleeting up there. There was no one there and there was no skiing. We got down to the bottom of the ski slope. We were the only people around and we were soaking wet because it was raining at the bottom of the mountains. And we had no idea where we were going to stay that night. We wanted to find a B&B, but it wasn't really, that area wasn't developed for tourism nearly as much as it is now. So we hitchhiked into the edge of town, and the guy who gave us a ride dropped us off at a little grocery store and said, maybe the lady in there will be able to recommend a B&B for you, because he didn't have any place to recommend. So we go in the grocery store, dripping wet, and we asked the lady at the counter who was checking out groceries for people, ask her if she could suggest a place where we could stay that night. She didn't have any suggestions, but she asked the people standing in line to buy their groceries, is there anybody here who can help out these two wet girls? And so what happened was that there was an older man at the end of the line, and finally he said, well, they can come home with me. Now, I know what you're thinking. That probably wasn't a really good idea for a couple of young college girls to accept a ride home with an unknown man. And instead of driving into town where we thought we were going, he drove onto the edge of town, out in the country sort of, to this rather forbidding looking gray house. And we were beginning to wonder if we'd made the wrong decision. But when we got inside, it turned out that his wife was an American. She was really nice to us, and she told us to sit down and dry out in front of this fireplace, which had a raging fire in it. She cooked dinner for us. She went in and made up a bedroom for us to sleep in that night. She cooked breakfast for us the next morning, and the man said he would drive us to the train station because we were planning to leave again and go further on our travels. But he said, I'll take you to the station, but first I have to go feed my reindeer. So he took us out back behind the house to where he had a paddock, or a corral, as we say in America, that had 3 or 4 reindeer in it. And one of them was a white reindeer. And he introduced us to his 4 reindeer, let's say, and including a white one. Not this one, but this one's part of the story, and I'll come back to her later. And he said that was the only pure white reindeer in all of Scotland. Well, now I thought it was pretty cool to have reindeer in your backyard, and especially to have a pure white one, but I had no idea how unusual that really was. Well, let's fast forward to Norway in 1976, and my husband and I were making a road trip of several thousand miles through Norway and Sweden, and we spent 10 days above the Arctic Circle. And one night we stayed with a reindeer herder, one of the Sami people, the ethnic group that lives up in that area, and they're traditional reindeer herders. And the next morning, he took us out to the corral, to the paddock, to meet his herd of reindeer, and he introduced us to a lot of them by name. He knew all of them by name. So those were my first encounters with these very interesting animals. And later on in this century, I've had the opportunity to photograph reindeer everywhere from Alaska to Mongolia to Scandinavia and Scotland. Here's just a few examples of photos. This is from a festival in Mongolia. These are reindeer in Finland and Sweden and Norway above the Arctic Circle in the wintertime. Excuse me. And in 2017, the same year I started working on Viking ocean cruises, I went to Scotland to retrace the route that I had taken way back in 1969 on my first trip to the British Isles. And I discovered during my researches that that gray stone house where I had stayed overnight that had reindeer in the backyard is now the Cairngorm Reindeer Center, and it's a famous place where they have the only herd of free-ranging reindeer in the British Isles. And inside, this is the reception room and gift shop now. But if you look behind that reindeer in the background, right behind him, you can just barely see that fireplace where I've dried out that night when I was so dripping wet and stayed in this place. And I went out back, and they still have reindeer in the backyard there too. I also discovered that the man who'd given us a ride at the grocery store and taken us back to his house was actually a famous Sami reindeer herder and reindeer breeder from Sweden. His name was Mikael Utsi, and he was a person who reintroduced reindeer to Scotland after they had been extinct there for 700 to 800 years. And it turned out that his wife was Dr. Ethel Lindgren, and she was an American anthropologist who was well known for her work among Mongolian reindeer herders. And that pure white reindeer that I met in 1969 was Snowflake, who had been born almost exactly a year before I met her on nearly her first birthday. So all of those little coincidences got me really much more interested in reindeer. And so what I'd like to do today is share with you some facts about reindeer and then talk about the myths and legends that they're part of too. So reindeer belong to the deer family, and their particular species is Rongifer tarandus. And there are several subspecies of reindeer, between 7 and 11 different subspecies, depending on which scientist you talk to. And that's because reindeer can evolve differently depending on the different habitats that they're living in. For instance, this is a reindeer from Svalbard, the Svalbard archipelago, and reindeer there have shorter legs and stockier bodies and rounder faces than reindeer in lots of other places. So reindeer are thought to have originated in North America about 3 to 4 million years ago. And then they spread all the way across the northern latitudes into Europe and Asia. And during the Ice Age, they extended as far south, not only as Scandinavia and Russia, but as far south as France and Spain. And in northern Asia, they were in Siberia and Mongolia and China. And then after the ice sheets retreated, the reindeer sort of followed them north into the Arctic and subarctic areas. So they're not in the southern areas now at all. And you can see on this map where they are, green in North America and red in Europe and Asia. And reindeer live in lots of different habitats. They live in tundras and forests. They live on mountains and on islands, but always above 50 degrees north latitude. So this is a reindeer, a forest reindeer, and these are tundra reindeer. You can see a big difference in their habitats. And today there are about 3 to 4 million reindeer worldwide, but their numbers fluctuate because of diseases and climate change and other challenges. Right now, global warming is really affecting reindeer and the foods that they normally would eat, and also oil and gas explorations in the Arctic are disrupting their traditional migration routes. They're called reindeer in various languages of Europe and Asia, and in reindeer in English, of course. Our English word comes from the Old Norse word hrein, meaning a deer or horned animal. But in North America, reindeer are known as caribou. And that's from the French-Canadian word that came from the native people, the native Mi'kmaq people. The word was kalapu, which means digger of snow. In a few minutes, you'll see why they are diggers of snow. So in North America, they're reindeer. But in the rest of the world, in North America, they're caribou, but in the rest of the world, they're reindeer. And reindeer were domesticated from the wild about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago in southern Siberia. So in different places now, they've got different names. They're caribou in North America. They're reindeer everywhere else in English. So you can see English, reindeer, caribou. The Norwegian word is really similar to our English word. And then Swedish, Finnish, Russian, and of course indigenous peoples all over the world have their own names for reindeer too. The male reindeer are known as bulls, occasionally as stags, but usually as bulls. And they can grow to up to 4 to 5 feet tall at their shoulders, 6 or 7 feet long, and the heaviest ones weigh up to even 550 pounds. And the bulls mate with 15 or 20 females in the autumn. And these are the females known as cows. And they're smaller. They're smaller than the males. They're smaller in height, and they're only 5 to 6 feet long and weigh about half what the males do. And the females, if they're fertile, have one newborn every year. Twins are rare. And this is what the newborns are. They're known as calves. Isn't that sweet? I love that picture. And calves are born in May and as late as early June, and they weigh 9 to 15 pounds at birth, which is about the same size as a human baby. And 24 hours after being born, these little calves can run because they need to be able to get away from predators, and predators really love small baby animals that are very vulnerable. They also grow quickly and start sprouting their antlers within 1 month. And if you look at the top of this little reindeer here, this little reindeer calf, you can see those 2 little buds that are coming out above his eyes, right by his ears. Those are called pedicules, and that's his antlers starting to bud. So this is a reindeer calf that's less than 24 hours old. This one's 5 days old. And this one's a couple weeks older. So you can see that they grow quickly. And by autumn, they've got their antlers growing because they're going to need them. There's also a category of reindeer known as reindeer oxen. And reindeer oxen are domesticated reindeer that have been castrated, males, and they grow stronger and live longer than reindeer in the wild and then other domesticated males that are not castrated. So a reindeer ox can grow up to 700 pounds, which is really heavy. And they're more docile than other reindeer, mainly because they haven't got those male hormones surging through them. And they're known as Christmas reindeer because they are very docile, they're easier to train, they've got those big, beautiful antlers, and I'll tell you in a few minutes why they have those big, beautiful antlers at Christmas time. They're also often used as the leader of the herd, usually with a bell around their neck, because, as I said, they're easy to train and they're easier to take care of. And reindeer are definitely herd animals. They stick together. Whether the herds range in size from just a few hundred to several 100,000. And One of the main reasons for herding is to protect themselves against predators. Their primary predator is wolves, but also bears, foxes, lynxes, and think about it, midges and mosquitoes in the summertime. Midges and mosquitoes can drink up to a pint of reindeer blood every day. And of course, another predator of reindeer is humans who hunt them too. Humans have been hunting reindeer for at least 20,000 years. And reindeer migrate. Both the wild and the domesticated ones migrate 1,500 to 3,000 miles a year round trip. So the wild ones migrate on their own, and the domesticated ones migrate with their semi-nomadic reindeer herders that follow along with them on their migration routes. And in the summer, they go north to the tundra, where they have the kind of food that they like to eat, and it's only available during the summer months in the tundra, and that's where they give birth to their calves, too. And then in the winter, they come south for shelter in the valleys and places in the forests to get out of the winter, pretty much, even though they are really good winter animals themselves. And reindeer are speedy. These animals can run. They can run in bursts up to 50 miles an hour, and they can sustain running at 20 to 30 miles an hour for several hours. They're also good swimmers. They swim across rivers on their migration routes, and they've also been known to swim across sea inlets even. So let's look at some other characteristics of these interesting animals. They have shorter legs and stockier bodies than most other deer. And as I said, the domesticated deer grow heavier than those in the wild. They've got thick necks and big square noses, and they come in many different sizes, shapes, and colors. And reindeer live in the wild 10 to 15 years, but they can live longer if they're domesticated, up to 20 years. They also have very distinct personalities. They're curious, they're sociable, as I said, they're herd animals. If they're raised around humans, they're generally very gentle and docile, and you can get close to them. But reindeer herders will tell you that these animals can be stubborn and cantankerous too. Many of them have very distinct personalities and minds of their own. So let's take a look at some of the details about the reindeer, starting from the tip to the tail with the antlers. Reindeer are the only deer species where both the males and the females have antlers. And their antlers are the second largest of all the deer species. Only moose have bigger antlers than reindeer. Males' antlers are larger than the females', that's to be expected, and their size and shape varies according to genetics, the physical condition of that reindeer, and what time of year it is. And the antlers are actually bone. They're not horn. Most people think that they're horn, but they're actually bone that grow out of the top of the reindeer's head between spring and the end of summer, and they grow really fast, up to 1 inch a day. So what's the function of antlers? Well, first off, to display, to show that you're a really special one in the herd. And if you're a male, also to show that you're really strong. This is the kind of reindeer, if you're a female, that you want to mate with. Antlers also tell about the reindeer's status in the herd. And it's interesting because even females who have larger antlers will have higher status than other females whose antlers aren't quite as impressive. And of course, the males use the antlers for fighting. They fight each other for dominance, getting to decide which one gets to mate with those 15 or 20 females in the autumn. And they also use their antlers, of course, all of them do, to fend off predators. And antlers are good for digging in the snow, too, for finding food. But they shed them every year. Antlers come off annually, and that's because of changes in hormones in the animals. And they're different between the males and the females. The males lose their antlers in November after they finished mating, whereas the reindeer oxen, those castrated males keep their antlers on until after the new year. The females, however, keep their antlers on through the winter because they use them to dig for food and to protect their calves against predators. And then in the late spring, after they give birth, then they shed their antlers too. So just think about it. Which kind of reindeer have antlers at Christmas time? It's the females and the reindeer oxen. So that means that Santa's reindeer are either girls or castrated males. And then those antlers start growing again. The males start growing them again in March, the females in May or June, as I said, after giving birth to their calves. And all of them have their full growth by the end of the summer because those antlers do grow fast, up to 1 inch a day. And see how fuzzy they look at this time of year. That's known as velvet, the antler velvet on those, very fuzzy looking. And antler velvet, let me run back a minute to that one. The velvet is a thin layer of skin that's full of blood vessels, and that brings nutrients to the antlers as they're growing, particularly calcium, because those antlers are bone. And then once the antlers have reached full growth, which is determined by the genetics of the animal, of course, then the velvet starts sloughing off. So you can see this one, how scruffy his antlers look right now because the velvet's sloughing off. And right here, this is a close-up. It gives you a better idea of what it looks like as the velvet's coming off. And this comes off in the autumn. And then once all the velvet has come off, the males are ready to mate again, like this guy. Reindeer eyes are interesting too. You don't think too much about the eyes of an animal, but reindeer eyes are interesting. They look brown to us, but if you shine a light into them, they look blue in the wintertime and gold in the summertime. And they can also see things in the ultraviolet spectrum, and so that's helpful in the winter darkness, especially because remember, these animals live up in the Arctic and subarctic where it's dark all winter round, and so they need to be able to find food in the dark. They need to be able to spot the other members of the herd. And this helps them because they can see the ultraviolet light that comes off the fur of the animals and the urine of other animals. So if they get separated from the herd, they can find the herd again by sight. And they can also see that predators are around them and get away from those. Another part of the reindeer that's really interesting is the nose. You see that they've got these big square noses. They're completely covered with fur, which keeps them warm. But the inside of the reindeer's nose consists of very thin bones arranged kind of like a chambered nautilus shell. And they've got a thin membranes of skin and blood, or of blood vessels in there, so that when the reindeer breathes in, the air goes through those different chambers of that chambered nautilus nose, and the blood vessels warm the air so that when the air finally gets to the reindeer's lungs, it's warm. So I assume that reindeer don't get ice cream headaches eating snow like we do either, because the cold weather, the temperature of it doesn't hurt them the same way. But what's really interesting about the reindeer's nose, if you do a thermal imaging of a reindeer's head, the nose shows much, much redder than the rest of the head. So it glows, and there's actually then a scientific reason for Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. The mouth too, all the lips, they are covered with fur, which keeps them warm. And reindeer are very vocal animals. They make more sounds than other deer too, and they use them to communicate with other reindeer in the herd. So they grunt and snort and bellow and bleat and bawl. The little ones do, especially when they get separated from their mothers. You can really hear them. And of course, the reindeer are covered with fur, as I said, from their lips to their nose to their tail and to their hooves. And what's interesting is that their fur is really thick. They've got an inner coat of woolly, very, very fine fur, and it's very dense. 2,000 hairs per square inch. Try to imagine that, 2,000 hairs per square inch. And then their outer layer of fur is composed of coarser guard hairs, they're called, 2 inches long, and those add another 600 hairs per square inch, and they're hollow. The guard hairs are hollow, and they trap air. So that provides buoyancy when it helps them float when they're swimming, and it also provides insulation in addition to providing warmth from the rest of the cold. And reindeer come in a wide range of colors, from black to white, and a lot of shades of brown and gray in between. And also, each individual reindeer changes color throughout the year. They're not just one color all year round. So in the winter, they have a much lighter coat. And then comes along late spring and into the summer, they start molting and losing that light coat. You can see this one here. This one's given birth to her calf. She hasn't shed her old antlers yet, and she's molting her winter coat, her white coat, and getting her brown summer coat, and pretty soon she'll lose her antlers too. And by summer, they've got this nice brown coat, which is not quite as thick as their winter coat. Also, you may have noticed that a lot of the reindeer, they've also got a ruff of fur, longer fur around their neck, and it's particularly noticeable in this one. And then by autumn, by October, their winter coat is really coming back in. And some of them in the higher latitudes will already have their full winter coat by the end of October. And it's whiter, lighter again. And as I said, these really thick coats of fur provide good insulation for the reindeer, keeping them warm. And they are so well insulated that when a reindeer sits down in the snow that is falling on the reindeer's back doesn't melt. And the snow that's underneath that reindeer doesn't melt either, which shows how well the warmth is kept inside the animal itself. Also, the fur, that lighter fur in winter, is really useful for camouflage, as you can see here with this pure white reindeer. But the other reindeer too have much, much lighter coats than in the summer, and so they will look different. But this brings me to the subject of the pure white reindeer, which are white all year round. They don't change color. They stay white like this one in the middle. Here's an example of a baby one, a calf, and the one I showed you earlier. And this one is Blondie. She belongs to the Cairngorm reindeer herd in Scotland, and she is actually a direct descendant of Snowflake, the white reindeer that I met at that same place way back in 1969. And white reindeer are known as leucistic, or sometimes it's pronounced leucistic. As I said, they're white all year round, and their color happens because of a recessive gene that they inherit from both parents. It's also interesting that these pure white reindeer are deaf. And of course, that's a big hindrance to them in the wild because they can't hear predators. They can't hear, a wolf trying to sneak up on them. So it's actually rare that you find white reindeer, pure white reindeer in the wild. It's rare anyway for them to occur, but even rarer for them to live very long in the wild. And the difference between a leucistic reindeer and an albino one is leucistic reindeer have an absence of color, but they're not albino. They don't have pink eyes and pink noses and pink feet. So they do have a little color, but it's their absence of other colors. It's not a complete lack of pigment. And white reindeer are considered very special in reindeer herding cultures around the world. They have a spiritual importance to those people, very revered by the reindeer herders. And if one finds them, if a herder finds a wild reindeer, that is supposed to bring good luck to his family, riches, and happiness forever. So they are considered absolutely special animals, and you can understand why. They are so beautiful. Now let's move on down from the fur to the hooves. And you can see that the feet are almost covered with fur too, to keep the reindeer warm. And the hooves are large and hairy. They splay out to spread the reindeer's weight when it's walking on snow in the winter and on the tundra in the summer. You can also see that it's got 4 toes, 2 big ones in front, and then there are 2 smaller ones in back. And when a reindeer walks, it makes a clicking noise. And that's because a tendon on the slips over the bones in the ankle joint. And every time it takes a step, that tendon slips over the bones in that ankle joint and makes a click sound. So if you know that Christmas song, up on the housetop, click, 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 down through the chimney with good Saint Nick, well, when I was a kid, I thought the click, click, click was the clatter of reindeer hooves on the roof, but it turns out it's actually those ankle joints making that clicking sound. The hooves are also concave, and they act as a scoop for scooping up snow, and kind of like flippers when the reindeer are swimming in rivers and in the ocean. So you can understand why the Micmac people in Canada called them diggers of snow. And what are they digging for? They're digging for food. So that brings me to the question of, what do reindeer eat? Well, they are herbivores. They eat vegetation. They have been known on rare occasions to eat bird eggs and lemmings and even fish, but they are primarily herbivores. So they eat grasses, sedges, the shoots and leaves from willows and birch trees, ferns and berries, lots of things that they find on the tundra in the summer, and mushrooms. Reindeer love mushrooms. So keep that in mind, because that's important to our story as we go along. In the winter, however, they live almost all on lichen. They eat lichen off trees, and they dig for lichen under the snow. And lichen are a kind of strange organism, a composite of a fungus and an alga. And here in the picture, you'll see the kind of lichen that reindeer eat. It's known as reindeer moss. They can smell it under the snow, and it comprises 80% of what they eat in the winter. And reindeer lichen is very high in carbohydrates, so that's something that helps to keep them warm in all that cold weather too. And of course, they get their drinking water from rivers and streams, where they get minerals too. They also get salt and other minerals from drinking the urine of other animals, including humans when there are reindeer herders around. And, reindeer, let's just face it, reindeer are cute. They're cute animals. People tend to like them a lot just because they've got sweet-looking faces. But that's not the reason that people have kept reindeer for thousands of years, and that's not the reason they've hunted them even longer. It's because reindeer have a lot of uses to people. From tip to tail, nothing goes to waste. So reindeer have been used for thousands of years for food, clothing, and shelter among people living in the northern latitudes. Their meat is eaten raw, frozen, dried, smoked, cooked, and even canned commercially. Here's some photos I took in Finland of different ways that reindeer meat is marketed. And the milk of reindeer, these are mammals, of course, the milk of reindeer isn't just for the little calves. People have been milking reindeer for about 2,000 years also. Here's some photos of people in northern Scandinavia milking the reindeer herd. And reindeer milk is really thick and creamy. It's got 22% butterfat. And you think about it, the cow's milk, if we drink the whole milk from a cow, that is actually only 4% butterfat. So reindeer milk, much, much creamier with 22% fat. It's rich in proteins and minerals, and it's also made into reindeer cheese. So if you travel in Scandinavia, sometimes you can even find reindeer cheese in the supermarkets, but it's pretty rare. And as I said, it's also used for things like clothing. These are photographs that I've taken of a variety of clothing from different places all over the world, from Alaska to Siberia to Scandinavia. And you can see the different ways in which it's fashioned into really warm clothing for people. These two beautiful dresses in Siberia are made out of a different kind of deer hide, and they've got reindeer fur as trim on the neck and the sleeves and the hem. And of course, reindeer hides are really good for shelter too, for covering teepees, tents, and yurts, and used for bedding inside those too. And a lot of artifacts are made out of reindeer antlers, reindeer bones, reindeer tendons even, and reindeer hides. So tools and toys and buttons and decorations and jewelry all carved out of reindeer antler and reindeer bone. Religious objects made from it too. Medicines from different parts, different glands of the reindeer. And reindeer hides are cut into thin strips and braided together to make lassos for lassoing those reindeer in the herd. They're also used for transportation. Lots of different ways for transportation. They're used as pack animals by nomadic people as they're moving from one place to another. See, this lady's even got her cook stove tied onto that reindeer in the front. This is a gold prospector with his reindeer as a pack animal. And archaeological evidence shows that up to 2,000 years ago, reindeer were actually used to harnessed and used to pull sleds. And it takes up to 2 years now to train a reindeer for pulling a sled. And this is how they're used. Sometimes only one reindeer, sometimes a team of them like this, just like a dog sled, only it's a reindeer sled. They're also used for pulling carriages. This is a nomadic people in Siberia who are moving from one place to another with their herd and using the herd to help pull their goods along with them, their household goods. And how about this one? Pulling houses, a mobile home. These are the Dolgun people in northern Russia, and they're traditional reindeer herders, and they live in houses like this. These houses now are covered with canvas, but they used to be covered with reindeer hide, and they're mounted on runners like skis. And when the family needs to move from one place to another for the reindeer to have a place to eat, as they eat out the reindeer lichen in one place, they need to move on to another, and they pull their houses behind them this way. People also ride reindeer, just like they ride horses and donkeys and mules. And some examples of people from northern Scandinavia, Sami people with their reindeer. And these from northern Russia. And reindeer can be used as sport animals, as in reindeer sled racing, of course. And how about this? Actual reindeer races where the jockeys are pulled behind them on skis. Or this one where people race reindeer. This is a picture in Anchorage, Alaska, and this is kind of like what I call the northern version of the running with the bulls in Pamplona in Spain. Only this is the running with the reindeer. And how about having reindeer as your wedding attendants? If I had known about that, I would have loved to have had a reindeer as the bridesmaid and best man. But reindeer also, besides their many practical uses for people over thousands of years, they also figure a lot in the legends and lore of people around the world. And there's some interesting creation stories. There are native Siberians, who believe that the Great Spirit created the world out of different parts of a reindeer. And there are Alaskan Native people who believe that humans and caribou, or reindeer, humans and caribou were once created as the same animal, and only later did they become different animals, and yet each one of them still carries within them a piece of the other's heart. Reindeer have also been the spirit animal of reindeer herders. Reindeer herders will tell you this, that there's one animal in the herd that's special, and that's an animal that has saved the herder from problems, from danger, save the herd itself from danger, maybe saving the herder from accidentally walking off a cliff during a blizzard or in deep fog, or warning the herder that there's predators nearby. And so these people come to believe that there is one special animal in the herd that is their own spirit animal. And some Siberians believe that reindeer were created by the sky god, not only to provide food and transportation on Earth, but also to lift the human soul up to the sun on an annual soul voyage to the heavens. So keep that in mind about the reindeer actually taking the human soul up to the heavens, because we're going to come to that in a minute. That brings us, of course, to the notion of flying reindeer. And how did we get flying reindeer with Santa? Well, in the English language, it was the poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," written in 1823 by Clement Clarke Moore. And he combined different elements of European folklore into a story about Santa delivering his presents with a sleigh pulled by 8 flying reindeer. And then in 1864, we have the song that I mentioned earlier, "Up on the housetop, click, 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 down through the chimney with good Saint Nick." Well, those reindeer had to get up on the roof somehow, and they must have flown there. And then in the 1920s, there was a reindeer reindeer raising and meatpacking company in Alaska that decided to pair with the Macy's department stores and have a Christmas parade in 7 American cities down in the lower 48. And when they did that, they always had Santa. The end of the parade was Santa and his reindeer. Well, they had live reindeer back then. And the point of doing all of this was actually to market reindeer meat and reindeer hides down in the lower 48 in the United States. But guess what? Their marketing ploy backfired, because who wants to eat Santa's reindeer? So we still have, in the Macy's parades every year, we have the end of the parade is Santa with his reindeer, but nobody's eating them. In 1939, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer comes along, and he started out as the main character in a poem that was written for the Montgomery Ward department stores. One of their advertising copywriters wrote a poem about this reindeer that had a red nose that all the other reindeer didn't like because he was different. And it's really the story of somebody who's different, who's being bullied by everybody else. But what happens, of course, is that it's a foggy, snowy night when Santa needs to go deliver all those gifts to children, and he taps Rudolph to lead the sleigh, to lead the reindeer team on the sleigh, because he could light the way through the night. And it was such a popular story that it was turned into an illustrated book in 1947 and into a song recorded by Gene Autry in 1949. Well, that was quite a while back, but Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is still with us today in books and comic books, films and television specials, and even in video games. And of course, there are a lot of other films that feature reindeer too that aren't necessarily Rudolph. These are just a few of them I have listed here. One of my favorites, one of my absolute favorites, is Prancer. And of course, everybody loves Polar Express too. But the idea of all these flying reindeer that you get in folklore and in films and in books, the idea of flying reindeer goes back very far in time. And look at what we have here. These are things known as deer stones in Mongolia, and they date back about 3,000 years. And these are stones that are placed at sacred sites or that were placed over graves. And I want you to look at them carefully. They've all got flying reindeer on them. And do you see on the picture on the right, there's a circle at the top? It's like the flying reindeer flying up to the sun. You can even see that on the unpainted one on the left at the very top. There's a circle. And these are flying reindeer going up to the sky, just like I mentioned about the Siberians who believed that the human soul goes on a special journey to the Great Spirit on the back of a reindeer. And a lot of this idea of flying reindeer is connected with shamanistic beliefs. And a shaman, and this is among the Mongolian and Siberian people, all right? And a shaman is a spiritual leader, someone who's also can heal illnesses. And shamans wear special costumes that have a drum, and they've got a lot of amulets on them, and they often have deer antlers on them. And through a ritual of drumming and taking drugs, they go into a trance, and actually they believe, and the people that they're watching believe, that they fly upward to the upper world, or they fly down to the lower world, where the shaman actually can communicate with the spirits of those other worlds, and then come back to Earth and provide advice to the people who want advice, the people who've consulted the shaman. So here's an example. You can see here's another one where the actual costume has deer antlers on it, and many, many shamanistic costumes around the world you will find have deer antlers. Also, in Siberia, ancient mummies have been found in Siberian tombs, and they too have reindeer tattoos on them. So there's some connection with reindeer, flying reindeer, and going to the other worlds, the upper or the lower world. But why flying? What is it that makes those reindeer fly? Well, remember I told you that reindeer like to eat mushrooms, and people have observed when reindeer have just eaten a big patch of mushrooms, certain kinds of mushrooms, some of those reindeer start jumping around, leaping on the hillsides, looking like they're ready to take off and fly. But their anthropologists also think have another theory about this, and it has to do with magic mushrooms, those mushrooms that contain hallucinogens that are a drug that make people get high. And so what they think is that, in fact, there are some of these mushrooms like these that are poisonous to humans, but they're not poisonous to reindeer. So the humans see the reindeer eating them, and the reindeer getting high on them. And then the humans decided to drink the reindeer urine, because what happens is the poison, they found out, isn't in the urine. So the reindeer can eat the hallucinogenic mushrooms, and then there's the reindeer pee comes out the back end. People collect it, the shamans would collect it and drink it. And they would get high from the drug because they wouldn't be poisoned by it, because it had been cleaned out in the reindeer's system. The poison had, but the hallucinogen remained. Now, I don't know who it was who came up with the idea of drinking reindeer pee. But as a reindeer herder said to me once, the whole idea of flying reindeer originated with a bunch of stoned Mongolians 3,000 years ago. So you can now tell your friends that on Viking.TV, you learned the real reason that reindeer can fly. And I'd like to recommend to you a few books in case you'd like to learn more about reindeer yourself. This one by Piers Vitebsky is wonderful, The Reindeer People Living with Animals and Spirits in Siberia. And Vitebsky is an anthropologist from Cambridge University and also a very good writer. I'm sure you would enjoy this one. Reindeer and Arctic Life is by Tilly Smith. She and her husband are now the current owners of the Cairngorm reindeer herd. And it is the only herd of free-ranging reindeer in the British Isles. And as I said, was originally introduced back in 1952 by the people that I stayed with at the Cairngorm Reindeer Center. This book will tell you not only the history of the Cairngorm herd, but a lot of interesting facts about reindeer too. Sass Carey's book about reindeer herders in my heart recounts her experiences as an American nurse working with reindeer herders in northwestern Mongolia. And Seth Kantner's book, 1,000 Trails Home, Living with Caribou, is about his own experiences with these animals in Alaska. So the herd and I thank you very much for coming today to listen to their story. And I also want to give special thanks to the Cairngorm Reindeer Centre in Glenmore, Scotland, for providing many of the photographs that you saw today and providing a lot of background information on reindeer. Other photographs came from these sources. And on that note, I wish you many happy reindeer dreams for this holiday season and throughout the whole year. Thank you very much.